Mr. Bell, can you see me?
I can, Sir Brian.
And you can obviously hear me too. Good. Let me tell you who you're talking to. You're talking to a room which has probably about 20-odd people in it. We are back to having people who come in person to watch the inquiry proceedings. But the wider audience, which will be probably around about 200, perhaps, it depends how many are watching from Scotland, will be beyond watching remotely. So they're the audience probably that you're really addressing, in particular those who are in Scotland as you are. And you're there on your own, are you?
I am, sir, yeah.
And are you in St Andrew's House, or?
No, I'm in Gill Square, which is the headquarters for NHS National Services Scotland.
Is that near the Astley Ainsley?
No, it's out. It's out at the Gill, out towards the airport from the centre.
I see. Right. Well, in just a moment, Miss Scott will ask you some questions, but first, Mary will ask you to take the oath.
So,
Please state your full name.
Martin Stocker Bell.
Could you take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bell. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You're the Director of Primary Care and Counter Fraud Services for NHS National Services Scotland. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in that role, you're responsible for the strategic direction and operational delivery of the business unit that operates the Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme.
That's correct.
And you've held that post since the 1st of February 2019.
Yes.
And your predecessor was David Knowles, was it?
That's correct.
And in your role, in that role, Director of Primary Care and Counter Fraud Services, you are also a director of the Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme, which I'm going to refer to as SIBS. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
As director of SIBS, you tell us in your witness statement that you have to ensure that the team administering the scheme is properly resourced, that they deliver the scheme outcomes, and that you have formal responsibility for approving applications to the scheme, and so you work closely with the scheme manager on that task. Is that an accurate reflection of your role as director?
Yes, it is.
And you also tell us that you report to the Chief Executive of NHS National Services Scotland. Is that right?
Yes.
And you also chair the SIBS advisory group.
Yes, I do.
And I'll come on to ask you a little bit more about that in due course. Is it right as well to understand that the staff at SIBS consist of the scheme manager, Sally Richards, and 2 administrators?
That's correct.
Can I get an idea from you about the numbers of beneficiaries on the scheme? And I'll take you to a document. It's Miss Richards' statement. It's WITN 4508001. And it's page 5 of that document. We have Miss Richards' statement on the front page, and if we go to page 5, at the bottom of that page, second half of that page, there's some tables. we have the first table says numbers transferred and SIBS applications, and we can see there that there are 535 beneficiaries in total at that stage. 472 of those, so the top 3 lines added together, look like they've transferred over from the Alliance House organisations, and then 63 new registrants registered with SIBS. Is that a correct way to read that table?
That's correct, and those numbers were correct at that time. The numbers move slightly over the year, obviously, but they're correct.
So it's slightly confusing because Ms Richards' statement is dated the 20th of April 2021, but in fact these numbers are somewhat earlier than that, aren't they?
Yes.
And then if we look at the bottom table, I wonder if you can just help us understand what those numbers mean. We can see that the beneficiaries or registrants are divided into types. So we've got 18 estates, 449 primary infectees, 11 secondary infectees, and those we've heard from some of the Alliance Health organisation witnesses, sometimes called infected intimates. I don't think that's a phrase that SIBS uses, is it?
No, we don't use that. We would refer to those as secondary infectee.
So those that have been infected usually by their partners or through needle stick injuries.
Yes.
And then you have 57 widows, widowers or partners, and a grand total we can see there of 535. And then those are in turn broken down on the columns on the rows on the left-hand side. Can you help me with this? The third row down, payment scheme chronic HCV stage 1 with widows annual payments, and we can see there's one person in that row. Is that the discretionary top-up, or does that say that only one widow is actually getting an annual payment at that stage?
I believe that is the one widow getting the annual payment at that stage. I can check with the team, but that's what I believe that to be. So
the widows, out of the 57 widowers and partners, only one is getting the annual payment. The others would have received. Why would they be registered as beneficiaries?
So the widows for. So I would read this table that we have 57 widows receiving payments. So I'd have to go back and check that particular line.
Well, perhaps we can deal with that after the hearing. We can get some clarity in relation to that.
Certainly.
Then, if we can look at another document, please, WITN 1146038, which is it's an exhibit to a witness statement. If we can go to the second page, it's a freedom of information request. It's an answer to a freedom of information request. We can see the date there, 3rd of August 2020. And if we go over to the second page, there's a table giving number of SIBS scheme members as at the 3rd of August 2020. And we can see at the bottom there the total is 542, so an increase. A small increase from the table we looked at earlier. Do you know whether that is an accurate total of the number of beneficiaries as of today?
As at yesterday, the total was 546.
You can take that down, Shimmick. I'm going to ask you some questions now about relationships between SIBS and the beneficiaries or registrants or members. Do SIBS call them members?
We call them members, yes.
I'm going to look at the terms of reference first. Shimmick, that's WITN 8002. So this is a document entitled Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme Advisory Group Background for Potential Members. So is this a document that's provided to those that are thinking of applying to become members of the advisory group?
Yes, and it's also available to the public on our website.
And if we turn, please, over to page 2 of this document, we can see there's a third of the way down, terms of reference. And it says the advisory group is not a decision-making body, but it will play an important role. It will take on an independent role in providing advice on service delivery and exercise those functions fairly and effectively without undue regard to any one particular interest or any personal concerns. Advise on the development of processes and procedures, particularly as the scheme is initially being established, but also in the event that the scheme is changed over time. Provide a strong and clear voice for all beneficiaries and applicants to promote best practice in service delivery. Advise on measures to ensure any beneficiary concerns and operational problems are handled appropriately. Facilitate greater openness in the delivery of the service. Promote cooperation between the scheme administrators and beneficiaries and their representatives. And then going down to the next paragraph, NSS will review these arrangements periodically. It will not be the group's role to consider individual decisions made by the scheme, except where, for example, that raises concerns about inconsistent approaches being taken to service delivery. The group will be separate from the Scottish Government, although government officials may occasionally attend as observers where appropriate. So who drew up these terms of reference?
These terms of reference were drawn up, I believe, by the original project that was set up. It was set up in order to establish the SIBs within NSS back in 2016, leading up to the scheme going live in April 2017. So I believe that's when the original terms were made up and came out, I believe, from recommendations based out of the independent reports that the government had commissioned, whether that was the clinical or the financial reviews.
And you tell us in your witness statement that in practice what that means is that the advisory group are briefed on the number and type of applications that have been made, how many have been approved, and any additional information or evidence that has been sought before a decision is made. That they are also briefed on the financial position of SIBs, and the purpose of the group, or one of the purposes of the group, is so that the members of the advisory group can question and challenge those SIBs employees that are present at the meetings. Is that an accurate reflection of in practice how this group works?
Yes, it is. As I would add, as chair, I of that group, I try to make sure that everybody's point of view has a chance to get their point of view across. More often than not, the government representatives are in attendance, so it's almost we can facilitate the discussion directly from the advisory group into and the members who are sit on that directly to government. And in the case of our surveys, the membership surveys we conducted in 2018 and 2020, the advisory group were the group that actually helped us make the decision of when we were going to run those surveys and what the questions would be. So we agreed all the questions, and we also did the analysis and agreed the action plans with the advisory group to ensure that they had an input into how we improve things going forward.
And just to get an idea of who sits on the advisory group, you tell us in your witness statement that there are representatives from the National Health Service, and we can see from the minutes that includes Health Protection Scotland, NHS National Services Scotland, and other representatives from individual trusts and so on. Is that right?
It's predominantly they're not Health Protection Scotland anymore. They're Public Health, it's now called Public Health Scotland. It was recreated last year as a new board last year. So Health Protection went into that. Ourselves from the SIBS as the NHS reps, we would bring any other NHS representative in it if needed. At the moment, we are the primary representatives for the NHS.
And then a number of representatives of groups such as Hepatitis Scotland, Haemophilia Scotland, Hepatitis C Trust, and the Scottish Infected Blood Forum.
Yes.
And then you've also said that there is a scheme member as well who's also part of the group.
I think there are two scheme members. I think they also represent the bodies that you've mentioned.
And we heard this morning, and you've said this yourself in your evidence just now, that the Scottish Government attend as observers. Can you tell us what the benefit of that is, having them there as observers and not taking part in the decision making?
So from my perspective, is that it allows, having them there is essential, because it then allows the representative groups and the whole advisory group as a whole to put its point across to government directly and help shape, where possible, the decision making or where we can. As an example, the recent discussions around parity back in March, before the actual decision was published, there were discussions around the levels, and we have 3 levels, and whether we need those if the discussions go ahead. And the advisory group recommended that government commission the clinical review group, David Goldberg, who sits on the advisory group, to commission him to re-establish his group and give some independent advice into government as to what that might look like going forward. And so they're having an influence, and certainly it will certainly at least make sure that those discussions are happening in an independent and objective way. So having the government present, so we don't have to just sort of move that conversation on. They're there present, and they can, and they do answer questions if they're asked directly. They answer questions at the meetings directly. And
in terms of as director of SIBS, what would you say the benefit of having a group, the advisory group, has been to SIBS?
It's essential, because notwithstanding the fact that my team speak to members on a daily basis, but collectively the advisory group can give us that lived experience to make sure so it's not just about what we do with SIBS. Clearly there's criteria, and we have to follow those criteria when we're administering the scheme, but it's how we do it, and making sure that we understand as much as possible the lived experience of our members, and try to be as empathetic as possible and as helpful as possible. So I think the advisory group have a really important part to play in that, which is why I think it's a really important group for us.
And you've said in your statement that it meets twice a year, is that right?
That's correct.
I want to explore with you other ways of keeping in touch with your membership. You have a newsletter which goes out twice a year, and in one of the newsletters, I don't think we need to go to it, there's reference to attending a face-to-face meeting to meet with beneficiaries. Is that something that happens frequently, or is that unusual?
No, I think that was the newsletter shortly after I arrived that I was looking forward to that. Unfortunately, this last 12 months that's not been possible. It's something that I still aspire to, because at the moment, my principal engagement with membership is through the advisory group, whereas my staff they have the day-to-day contact with members who are or applicants who phone up on a day-to-day basis. So the aim would be, once we're out of lockdown and the conditions allow, to have that ability. Again, it comes back to it's about how we engage. I think that the key thing about the newsletter, that goes out to all those members who have consented to receive it. But we also write when there's a significant change. So recently, with the government announcement on parity, we've written to every member, regardless of whether they've consented, because we feel it's important that every member gets a letter to inform them that change and what that change might mean for them. So the newsletter and the website obviously are for those who have consented or seek the information, but we do write to all members if there's a significant change. CPI was one when that was agreed last year, and again, the parity decision that happened on the 25th of March, I believe it was, we wrote straight away to members to say this is happening, and as soon as we are given the go-ahead to administer that, then we will issue those payments.
You've mentioned you've mentioned the surveys that were sent out to members. I don't think, unless you want me to, I don't think I need to go to the 2020 survey. We might look at it a little bit later on, but if I just read out some of the headline figures and then ask you the question, question, scheme members were asked to give their thoughts on the overall survey. Well, first of all, I should say that 73% of members responded to the survey. Members were asked to give their thoughts on the overall service they received from SIBS, and 91% scored the responses. 91% of scored responses rated the service as good or very good. What do you put that down to?
I think it's down to I come back to it's how we do it. It's the way the team engage with membership, the way we try to help where at all possible. So we don't need to go there, but the 2018 results were slightly poorer than that. So it tells me that things are still improving, but equally there's still more to do. So I think it's really is down to having quality people. It's a small team, but it's a good team, and they care. And I think that is the scores reflect the fact that they actually care about the members and try their best for them to make sure that we get the best result possible.
And is it important that the scheme understand the background to how the members became infected and have an understanding about HIV, hepatitis C and so on?
Yes, so I wouldn't say they understand every nuance of the various clinical manifestations, but they understand the devastating effect that the infected and the affected have suffered, and that's why it's having that empathy with the applicants, or indeed the members once they've successfully applied, it is so important.
I'm just going to ask you one question about funding. Is it right to understand from your statement that if at any point during the year SIBS considered that they may need more money from the government, that they would simply be able to ask for it and it would be provided to them?
That is my understanding, and certainly my experience over the last just over 2 years is that we discuss funding and budgets with government every quarter. We try to predict where at all possible. I guess it's more of a science. It's more of an art than a science, because it just is. But we do our best to predict what we will need. The government will start at this time of the year. They will give us an initial allocation so that we have the money to pass on, and by the sort of end of quarter 3, beginning of quarter 4, we will have those discussions about where are we and if there's a need for a top up. And certainly my experience has been that there has generally been a need for a top up. Last year the last financial year we are budgeted for about 10 million, came in just under that, so we didn't need a top up. But every other year previously, my understanding is that money has been made available.
I'm going to ask you some questions now on identifying new beneficiaries. Can I start by taking you to the scheme document, which is at WITN 4728003. This is the Scottish Infected Blood Support Scheme 2017, drawn up by the Scottish ministers under the 2005 Act. I just want to take you to this to just understand who the beneficiaries actually are. So if we can turn over to the second page of this document to section 3, paragraph 3, where it says eligibility. So payments may be made under this scheme to persons who come within paragraphs 4 to 15, and we'll look at those in a minute. Surviving spouses, civil partners, long-term cohabitees, or dependent children of qualifying persons. So just pausing there, there's two categories, if I can put it that way, of the bereaved community who can become beneficiaries, can become members of the scheme. Is that right? Partners, broadly speaking, and dependent children.
That's my understanding, yes.
And then we heard this morning that while partners can receive annual payments, so for 12 months, 100% of the deceased infected person's payment, and thereafter 75%, that is not the case for dependent children. Is that also your understanding?
That's my understanding. The children would apply for the what's going out of my head
The
now?
discretionary?
Yeah, it's the estate. They could make an estate claim. So if it was somebody who had never been registered before, with either the previous schemes or indeed SIBS, we've certainly had a case where the children have then put an estate claim and they've received the appropriate lump sums that would have been given to the parent had they applied at the time.
Is that only available to dependent children, i.e. children under the age of 21 in full-time education?
No, I believe that's applicable to the estate. So it'd be, or the executor of the estate could apply. That's my understanding.
And so dependent children, those who are aged under the age of 21 or in full-time education, can make applications themselves for discretionary payments. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that would include income top-up and single one-off grants.
I believe so.
Could we just, for my ease of mind, go back to the first page, if we may? Let's stop there. Yes, it's not or in full-time education, it's under the age of 21 years in full-time education.
Yes.
So there's a combined qualification. So someone who is 18 and is actually dependent financially, but is not in full-time education, does not qualify. And I see you're nodding, Mr. Bell. Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, that would be my understanding of that.
And then if we go back to page 2, so that deals with the members of the bereaved community. Page 2, paragraph 3C is transferring qualifying persons. So those are the people that were registered with the Alliance House organisations that came over to SIBS. So they're eligible. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the criteria for the paragraph 3A that we just looked at, which is the dealt with at paragraphs 4 to 15 of the scheme effectively sets out at paragraph 4 for hepatitis C stage 1, but there are equivalent provisions for stage 2 and HIV and co-infected. Paragraph 4 deals with primary infectees. Before 1st of September 91 was treated in the United Kingdom but under the National Health Service by way of receipt of blood tissue or blood product on the balance of probabilities as a result of that treatment was infected with hepatitis C, which is at stage 1, and at the time of making an application under this scheme is resident in Scotland or is resident outside the United Kingdom, but immediately before that resident was resident in Scotland. So that's primary infectees.
Yes.
Are you aware that in the other devolved nations, the criteria is not based on residence, but based on place of infection?
I wasn't aware of that.
Has SIBS ever come across a case that's fallen between the two? So if it would have to be infected in Scotland but living elsewhere. So on the face of it, wouldn't qualify for any of the schemes.
I certainly haven't come across that in my 2 years in the applications that I've dealt with.
And then paragraph 5, and again, equivalent provisions for the other hepatitis C stage 2 and HIV and co-infective, deals with those applicants who are secondary infectees, so were infected hepatitis C is at stage 1 by transmission from a person to whom paragraph 4 or the equivalent provisions applies, where at the time of transmission they were in a qualifying relationship and the transmission occurred because of sexual transmission, mother to baby, needle stick injury or other means, and then other provisions. So those are broadly speaking the categories of eligible beneficiaries. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is it, Shemit, you can take that down now. Is it also correct to understand from, again, I can take you to the paragraph if it's helpful, but to understand from the memorandum of understanding between SIBS and the Scottish Government that it's SIBS's responsibility to identify beneficiaries? In fact, it's between the Scottish Ministers and National Services Scotland. Would it be helpful if I took you to that document?
No, I think my understanding, certainly at the moment, SIBS continues to advertise itself in the scheme to the GP community, who we would expect to be able to make the appropriate people aware, the potential members aware. We also, obviously, through the advisory group, make sure that all our information is passed through their networks to make sure that we get the word out as far as practicable. I believe, and I think I said in my witness statement previously, I believe that the Scottish Government ran an advertising campaign back before the scheme was set up, although I wasn't with SIBS at that point. We do liaise with the solicitors who work on behalf of the Alliance House organisations, Russell Cook, about trying to identify any remaining people who may, for whatever reason, didn't consent to their information being transferred to us back in 2017.
So you're talking there about the process of transferring information from the Alliance House organisations over to SIBS, and the Alliance House organisations insisting on beneficiaries giving explicit consent for that process. And what you tell us in your witness statement is that 12 beneficiaries were lost on transfer. Is that right?
That's correct. I believe all bar 5 of those 12 have now the remainder had to apply, and they did apply. But during that application process, we were able to, through the Skipton reference number, we were able to identify that they had been Alliance House beneficiaries. But my understanding is as at today, 5 remain unaccounted for.
And does it follow from that the requirement by the Alliance House organisations that explicit consent must be given for any data to be transferred over to SIBS, that SIBS does not have any information about beneficiaries who were turned down by the Alliance House organisations and didn't become their beneficiaries?
That's in essence, that is correct. We have had applicants who have declared in their application process that they were declined by the Alliance House organisations, but we still look at the whole process. We don't. Being rejected by the Alliance House is not a default position. We will look at all the evidence that's presented to us equally. And
are you able to tell us whether some of those applicants who were turned down by an Alliance House organisation has subsequently applied to SIBS has in fact been successful?
I don't have that information to hand, but I could certainly get that information for the inquiry.
And so while SIBS can't themselves contact that cohort of beneficiaries who failed whose applications failed for the Alliance House organisations, is there anything that SIBS could do to notify that cohort that they can make applications to SIBS and they will be considered on their merits?
I think we already do that, again, not only through our own website, but also through the representative organisations that we have included within the advisory group, and making sure, because they have great networks, and getting the word out through the networks and also the GP community, we believe is probably the most effective way of getting to people the message to the right people. Sorry, no.
Is there a notice on the website saying in terms, please apply to SIBS even if you've been turned down by the AHOs?
I couldn't say for sure whether that's as explicit as that. I'd have to check.
Is that something that SIBS would consider?
I think absolutely. There's no reason just because they were turned down that is not an automatic default. The decision that we make is based on all the evidence presented to us. Clearly, if there is no evidence to be found, then it becomes challenging. But it's not because they have been turned down by one scheme or another. It's all the evidence that needs to be looked at.
Sorry, I think my question was unclear. Would SIBS consider putting a notice of that kind onto their website?
Yes.
Can I ask you as well what the process is for inviting a partner, whether it's widow, widower, cohabitee, of a member who has recently died to become themselves a beneficiary?
When a partner or cohabitee informs us of a member's passing, then the team would automatically inform them of what they are entitled to over that. So that, as you explained earlier, the 12 months of full payment, then 75%, and going forward with the £10,000 that's been proposed within the parity agreement, we would also then, once that's gone live, we would then forward that as well, so that and help them with that application. It could be a very difficult time for them, obviously, with the passing of their partner.
I'm going to come on a little bit later on and ask you about the issues about the death being caused by the virus in order to qualify, but I'm not going to address those now. But is there a similar process for informing dependent children of their ability to apply to SIBS to become a member?
I think we would, the person we would be informing would be the person who's informing us of the passing. So that would normally be the immediate next of kin. That could be the dependent child if the dependent child is the next immediate next of kin.
And does SIBS collect data on the cause of death of a member? I'm not aware that we specifically seek that. There are occasions where if there's a lack of evidence of in an application, for example, not of a member because they've already passed a certain threshold. So, but if it was an application for someone who was not a member or had never been a member, then we may look for something. The team may go to the death certificate to see if there's anything in that would allow us to confirm the cause, or even if it wasn't, if that was one of their, it could have been a complication from that was the cause of death, not the specific Hep C, for example, in itself, but was it contributory to that? Did they have it? And that would all form part of the evidence pack thing. And does SIBS collect data on the numbers of members who have died that are infected with HIV or infected with hepatitis C at stage 1 or stage 2 or co-infected and so on? We obviously, to keep understanding our numbers, we would know once we're informed of the death of a member, then we would note that for the record. So if the inquiry wanted to get those figures from SIBS, that wouldn't cause a difficulty? I don't believe so. I think and that's how that's why the numbers we discussed earlier on change sadly, sometimes on a monthly basis. Does SIBS do any kind of an analysis to understand whether there are any gaps in the members? So either whether there may be no members from a particular geographical region, which may mean that the clinical network's not operating efficiently, or by a particular type of patient. Is there any analysis of that sort undertaken by SIBS? I'm not aware of any of that being undertaken, no. Do you know whether there are any members who have become infected via their treatment for sickle cell anemia on the SIBS scheme? No. So there may be we don't look for that. There may be in the evidence packs for those who've applied since April 2017. There might be some information about that in the medical evidence, but it's not something that we routinely pull out and hold as a data set. But we have no information on those who transferred in April 2017, because they were automatically transferred. There was we didn't get any documentation other than the individual's personal details, I think the bank details, and there's generally the Skipton reference number. There was no medical evidence transferred with them. So it'd be very difficult to say for the whole membership what that meant. We could look at the numbers since 2017 as they apply, though, but it's not something we hold as a specific data set. And presumably the same could be said for those members who may have been infected via their treatment for thalassemia. Absolutely, the same detail. I'm going to ask you now about applications that have been made to come onto the SIBS scheme. Can we look, please, at your witness statement, which is WITN 4728011, and it's at noted down the wrong page reference, so let me just find the page reference. It's at page 48 of that. It's WITN 4728001. In fact, we'd better start at page 47. So we can see that's your witness statement.
Yep.
And at the bottom of page 47, you are asked how many applications have been refused because they do not meet the eligibility criteria, and of those, how many claim to have been affected via transfusion, and you say 43 applications to SIBS have not been approved, and then you set out on the following page the reasons for non-approval. Blood transfusion in 93, post 91, 1, confirmed intravenous drug user 6, HCV did not cause death 3, infected with Hep B, not Hep C 1, infected elsewhere, not in the UK 2, means tested 13. Just pausing there, is that an application for a discretionary payment?
Yes.
So that's not, in fact, that's not somebody wanting to come onto the scheme. That must be somebody that's already a member making an application.
Yes, and existing members, yeah.
No evidence of blood transfusion 4, self-cleared 7, applicants making an estate claim ineligible due to separation 2, and deferred stage 2 payments 4. And again, presumably that last cohort are existing members who are wanting to go over to HCV stage 2.
That's correct.
And then you say all applications mentioned above are, unless those not accepted due to means testing, claim to have had a blood transfusion, i.e. 30.
Yep.
I'm going to ask you some. I'm going to come back and ask you some questions about HCV not causing death, I think that yes, I'm going to ask you some questions about HCV not causing death, which you've already touched on. But just show me, you can take that down now. Just. Is it right to understand from your witness statement and from the documents that we've been provided by SIBS that the test for an application for somebody applying to come on to SIBS as a member is the balance of probabilities?
Yes.
And is it also right to understand that you adopt a policy of giving the applicant the benefit of the doubt?
That's correct. If the evidence is in the balance, and I think I said earlier about there's an element of art rather than science. If something balance of probability is over 50%, if it's around 50%, 49%, if it feels it's in the balance, then we would give the benefit of the doubt to the applicant.
And why do you do that? What's the thinking behind that policy?
So that's policy set by Scottish Government. I can only assume, as I wasn't here when I wasn't in post when that policy was made, but I can only assume it's to make sure that we, where at all possible, look after the applicants as far as possible, as practicably possible.
Do you know whether there have been any applications, any new applicants applying to SIBS with HIV since SIBS has started?
I think yes, we have. I think we've had one.
Is it so? Predominantly, you're dealing with applications from those infected with hepatitis C.
Yes.
The inquiry's heard quite a lot of evidence during the hearings for the Alliance House organisations about the difficulties that applicants faced, applicants infected with hepatitis C faced, and getting hold of their relevant medical records to evidence the treatment that they say they had, which caused the infection. I understand from your witness statement that if relevant medical records are missing when an application is made to SIBS, that SIBS itself undertakes further investigations to identify those records. Is that right?
That's correct. We would look to speak to general practice, perhaps the health board, where the treatment or procedure that the applicant has talked about, to see whether we can access documents that they, for whatever reason, either they haven't, the applicant hasn't asked for or thought to ask for. So we will try and go and get anything that's available to help support that. The team also go back to the applicants to make sure to find out who they have spoken to and who they haven't spoken to try and cross-reference where we can go. Regrettably, a lot of the records have been destroyed because of time, and the record holding retention policies at the time were not as they are now. So unfortunately, a lot of records have gone. Where there's no or low evidence, we would then we use Professor Hayes, who's one of our medical experts, and we use him to give an opinion on whether a procedure that has been described in the application form, to see whether he, in his opinion, and he clearly will consult with his appropriate specialist colleagues, but whether that would likely necessitate a blood product transfusion, a blood product, etc., to give us some indication of, whilst there's no record, the procedure might realistically be expected to have or there's a probability that a transfusion was required, and that then helps us with our decision making.
So just a couple of questions arising from that. First of all, you've indicated that you do everything that you can to try and find these medical records. In your witness statement, you suggest that includes approaching the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service and the Information Services Division to see whether they have any records that might assist about the use of blood or blood products for the particular procedure that the applicant says was undertaken. Is that right?
That's correct. I believe because it's the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service did an exercise post Penrose, or I think perhaps even before Penrose had reported, looking at all the records that they had of people who had received a transfusion to seek and advise and seek to get them tested. And obviously, Information Services Division, who also used to be part of National Services Scotland, but are now part of Public Health Scotland as of last April, they are essentially the for want of a better expression, they're the Office of National Statistics sort of element in Scotland. So they hold all of Scottish health data. So they might have information that would be helpful. So we ask them as well.
And have SIBS had success in finding medical records where applicants haven't?
On occasion, yes. Sometimes applicants have thought that perhaps the hospital that they'd had their procedure in no longer exists, but we've gone to the health boards, and indeed over time the health boards have changed from health boards to health trusts back to health boards. But sometimes they'll have they have archives, and they'll have kept, for whatever reason, things will have been kept longer than perhaps their retention records would have suggested. So we have had some success on that, but not in every case, certainly not.
And then you've indicated that where the medical records can't be found, the next step is to go to consult with Professor Peter Hayes, who is a hepatologist, to get an indication of what was called in previous hearings, Alliance House Organisation hearings, clinical plausibility, i.e. is it clinically plausible that the procedure that the applicant says they underwent would have required a blood transfusion or blood or blood products. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you said in your evidence that that it was likely that Professor Hayes would consult with colleagues. Is that your expectation, or the arrangement that you have with him, that he would effectively go and consult with colleagues if it's an orthopaedic procedure, he might go and talk to an orthopaedic surgeon.
Yeah, that would be my understanding. So that what he gives us back is a considered opinion on the probability of transfusion or other blood product being required.
And you have consulted with him, you say in your witness statement, on 13 occasions, is that right?
That's correct.
And do you provide the applicant with the advice that Professor Hayes provides to you?
I don't think so. So if it's a successful application, then they simply get a letter that tells them they've been successful. And if it's unsuccessful, then we explain in the letter why we think it's unsuccessful. And so it might say, if it had gone to Professor Hayes, it might say that that there's no evidence or plausibility of a transfusion, but it won't necessarily give every element of his response to us.
Do you think that it would be fairer to provide that information to the applicant if they failed?
I think we cover it, but it could do no harm for transparency. But I believe we cover it if there's no, we don't believe the clinical opinion is that there's unlikely to have been a transfusion, then that's what we would say in the letter in response to the application.
I'm just going to look then at the internal guidance for assessments of where there's no medical record, and that's WITN 4728017. This assessment of chronic hepatitis C infection applications, formerly known as Stage 1 of the Skipton Fund. Now, from your witness statement, you tell us that this is guidance that was drawn up by the Scottish Government. Is that right?
I think it was drawn up with the Scottish Government and those who were setting up the scheme, the project team that were setting up the scheme itself back pre-April 2017.
And then it sets out balance of probabilities principle. It sets out some guidance at the bottom of that page on the balance of probabilities principle. The assessor is required to make their decision on the balance of probabilities. The same principle also applies to an advanced HCV or HIV new application to join the scheme. They have to conclude that the chronic hepatitis C infection is more likely than not to have resulted from an eligible exposure via NHS blood product or tissue. And then in the next paragraph down, in other words, it has to be a probability and not just a possibility that the chronic infection with hepatitis C occurred in this way. Probable means that the probability that the event happened is more than 50%. And then see below in relation to cases where the probability is 50%, and that's the benefit of the doubt principle you've just been telling us about. Then if we can turn to page 5, please. That's quite right. Sorry, I'm not sure that's the right page reference, in fact. Sorry, it's page 2. So this is under the benefit of the doubt principle. The benefit of the doubt principle is the bit underlined, borderline cases where there's viewed to be just under a 50% chance of the infection having occurred as a result of infected NHS blood, tissue or blood products. The benefit of the doubt should be given in favour of the applicant. And then the next paragraph down, no facts should be discounted in the evidence gathering exercise unless they are found to have a lack of credibility. Every facet of the applicant's statement should be taken into account in the evaluation of the probability of infection. And then the next paragraph, although it's ultimately for the applicant to substantiate the application, in borderline cases where aspects of the applicant's statements are not supported by documentary or other independent evidence. So that's, you're talking here about where they can't find their medical records, or the medical records don't exist. The assessor may judge that those aspects shall not need confirmation when the following 5 conditions are met. And if we go over the page, the 5 conditions are set out. The applicant has made a genuine effort to substantiate his or her application. All relevant elements at the applicant's disposal have been submitted, and a satisfactory explanation regarding any lack or other relevant elements has been given. The applicant's statements are found to be coherent and plausible and do not run counter to available specific and general information relevant to the applicant's case. The applicant has applied to the relevant UK or Scottish scheme at the earliest possible time following diagnosis, unless the applicant can demonstrate good reason for not having done so, and the information provided suggests that the applicant is generally credible. Is it right? Has SIBS accepted onto the scheme applicants who are unable to substantiate the blood transfusion or blood products in their medical records, applying this guidance?
Yes, we have.
I'm going to, I'm just looking at the time. I think I've probably got another 40 minutes.
Well, let's take a break now then, shall we? If it's a convenient moment. Shall we come back at 22 to 4? Would that be all right?
Yes, sir.
So, 20 to 4. Now, you're giving evidence, Mr. Bell. You must not discuss what you've been asked about or anything you think you may yet be asked about with anyone, whoever they are, but you're free to talk about whatever else you might like.
Okay. Thank you.